Hey class, for my final exam and field trip presentation, I chose the 4th grade to focus on, and for my place, I chose Fort Macon State Park. This is a state park in Carteret County. For those of you who have never heard of it before, it is close to kind of Emerald Isle and Beaufort area. And the reason that I decided to do Fort Macon was because it's a place I've kind of loved my whole life. Growing up, I used to go there all the time. My grandparents would take me to walk around the old fort, climb through the tunnels, and explore this truly amazing piece of North Carolina history. And just because I have already so many memories there, it feels really special to be able to kind of design this learning experience that maybe I could even use one day in a future classroom. And this is just such a great 4th grade project because it just allows them to see how important this piece of history is to our state, and it connects perfectly to their NC history standards. So the standards that I will be addressing in the slides are going to be kind of the main one is kind of understand the role of various people, events, and ideas shaping North Carolina, along with summarizing the role NC has played in major conflicts and events throughout American history, and then use primary and secondary sources to compare multiple perspectives of North Carolina history. We'll be kind of talking about the Union soldiers, the Confederate soldiers, and even North Carolina civilians at the time. And then lastly, explain the significance of the historical symbols in North Carolina from various perspectives as well. The concept focus for this is kind of once again that overall arching idea of North Carolina's role in major conflicts through the history of Fort Macon. So Fort Macon is a pre-Civil War coastal fort that has now been fully restored, and it's just a great place to go and explore. They have guided tours you could do. They have cannon and musket demonstrations that I've seen before, and just lots of different exhibits and artifacts even that you can go and explore inside the kind of like little museum area. And it also is just kind of surrounded by that great North Carolina coast, which also can tie in so many different natural science connections. Also great fishing out there on the shoals. But you know, this kind of field trip focuses more on the history side of things. But it also includes, there's almost like 300 something bird species out there, and lots of nature trails, great for walking around with classes, and lots of just extension activities that you could pull off of this as well. So why Fort Macon? Well, Fort Macon played a major role in North Carolina during the Civil War, and that fits into perfectly with the 4th grade standards. And students can see here kind of the real primary sources and artifacts that were kind of throughout the whole Civil War era, and not just in textbooks that they're reading, but actually go out and see them. And I think the guided tours is something that really makes this place cool because you can kind of see it come alive through different storytelling and different demonstrations that go on. And Fort Macon also, I was looking on their website for the NC State Parks, they have lots of different events that are held at Fort Macon throughout the year and throughout the season. And just the fort itself is a historic symbol in North Carolina, and that kind of brings us back to the North Carolina symbols that was addressed in that standard. And it's just a really easy place to connect with comparing perspectives from that Union soldiers to the Confederate soldiers to also the role that civilians played in this town, because it was kind of in that local spot of Beaufort and Emerald Isle, and just hearing the local stories as well. So the site analysis, I have also kind of had some firsthand knowledge and experience pulling this stuff in. It has great educational value, lots of hands-on things through the different tours, the artifacts, and the walkthrough in the museum you can do there, and also even seeing the reenactments. And safety was a big one. You know, it's definitely a great controlled environment. It's been restored very nicely with new sidewalks and barriers and very clear boundaries, very accessible, in my opinion. And they have, you know, wide walkways and structured things to do if you want something more structured, to like book a tour or something like that, especially for elementary school students. And I was looking on their website, they even have a slot to register for field trips there. So they also have people that will come out and help with field trips and make it a more structured visit. And just kind of the relevance again, it has that strong direct alignment with NC history and is just a great place to see for local North Carolina history in our state. And the curriculum connection here, kind of the four main points would be how Fort Macon was used in different conflicts and its time period. So it was actually used in a few different ways and kind of repurposed throughout each era, even past the Civil War. So just kind of in different areas what the fort was repurposed for. And then secondly, what life was like for soldiers living in North Carolina during wartime, and then how to use exhibits and the plaques and the maps and everything that are there as those primary and even secondary sources. And then also, how does Fort Macon represent North Carolina's military history and the identity around that? And this was just kind of a brief field trip plan that I kind of put together. I think about 5 hours would be enough, maybe like a early morning arrival to a late departure. You could have a whole group kind of welcome, and then maybe do a guided tour, maybe see a demonstration, walk through the exhibit hall. They have a great kind of little art museum collection in there with great North Carolina art history. That'd be another great curriculum to pull from, or even doing a science extension activity. Maybe, complete a scavenger hunt. There was some stuff on the Fort Macon website that had great scavenger hunt activities. And then maybe a lunch on the beach and the nature walk and the observatory out there, and just see all the different great stuff that the surrounding areas of Fort Macon also has to offer. And then moving into the history lab portion, first, kind of the topic and historical focus was the Civil War, North Carolina's coastal defense. And the social studies theme in this would be conflicting perspectives during the major historical events. So this lab kind of introduces students to the history of Fort Macon and why it mattered during the Civil War and what life was like there for people involved. And then the compelling question for this kind of would be, how did Fort Macon help shape North Carolina's role in the Civil War? And this kind of, pushes students to further explore multiple different viewpoints, and not just one side, and using those primary sources and just kind of looking for the significance of the fort itself for North Carolina and North Carolina's coast. So here's an old picture of it that I found on one of the web archives. I thought it was super cool. Looks more like the original there. And so for the first one, I would do just a simple photograph to introduce the idea and concept of the fort. And then another one could be a map. This was a Civil War map of the North Carolina coast, kind of showing Fort Macon and all the different shipwrecks and forts and other things along the way. And then maybe a Confederate soldier uniform and gear, and kind of comparing that to then a Union Army artifact. So this one I found was kind of written orders and a written kind of siege of Fort Macon and what happened from more of a Union Army perspective. And then this newspaper clipping, which would be another secondary source, the fall of Fort Macon, and just kind of reading over that newspaper clipping and how did newspapers back then describe what happened at Fort Macon. And then another primary source would be just an artifact image. This one was just a Civil War era cannon used at Fort Macon, and kind of predicting what this might have been looked like during battle or all that sorts of stuff. And then there's a bunch of great videos on there. This was just one of them that I found. There's many on the Fort Macon website too to go explore. This one just talked about, as a secondary source, the siege of Fort Macon, and kind of what was the main reason the Union was able to capture Fort Macon. And then the historic symbol, this is the Civil War era North Carolina state flag, and looking at how this symbol has changed over the years. And then this was a Civil War timeline, so it was a kind of a timeline of war events involving North Carolina. And this one even showed throughout the state, so I thought that was really cool, and not just Fort Macon there. And then here's just my sources from all the different sites, and there is a ton of great stuff even within the Fort Macon State Park website. So that's also a great tool for teachers.